Welcome back to Downtown Sports, guys. This is the third video of the day. If you haven't already seen the previous two where I talked about Michael Bunting and his potential to be a steal of free agency for the Toronto Maple Leafs, and then Peter Mrazek earlier in the day, those videos will be linked above the screen. And make sure to get subscribed because we're going to be talking about a lot of this stuff over the next little while. But the Leafs signed David Kampf, to a 2-year deal for $1.5 million a season. Let's dig into it. So Kampf is 6'2". He's 26 years old, turning 27 in January. He's a center winger, but I more so believe that he's a centerman just by the sheer volume of faceoffs that he takes. 12 points in 56 games and had a shooting percentage of 1.6 this past season for the Blackhawks. So my initial reaction to this was, okay, Kyle, we asked for a new defensive shutdown centerman, someone to replace Kerfoot, or someone that allows Kerfoot to not have to play that role. Maybe Kerfoot moves to the wing, maybe he moves into the top six in an offensive role. Remember, 5 points in 7 playoff games. He's probably more geared towards that role, but Kampf is a bit of a confusing signing, especially for $1.5 million a season and 2 years. And if we're looking at some more charts, not necessarily the best player on the penalty kill. We already know that he can't score with the atrocious 1.6 shooting percentage, but more or less just a bottom 6 player in the NHL. But if we're looking at this player card here, this player does look a little bit more interesting, a little bit more intriguing. So maybe we're just looking at the wrong analytics. And this is kind of a new website to me, and someone suggested in the comment section you should be looking at the percentage of ice time that they spend against elite competition. Never mind the zone starts. And okay, yeah, fine. So we're looking at, it's smart, it's a good idea. So we're looking at the Chicago Blackhawks here and their forwards versus elite competition. And when we're scrolling down here, we're going to see that David Kampf, out of all of the Chicago Blackhawks forwards, spent the most percentage of his ice time against elite competition last season. And against that elite competition that he faced, he actually controlled the majority of the shot attempts. And the Blackhawks defensively last season were not pretty. So to pry one of the guys that was maybe better defensively off of him, their numbers aren't necessarily going to look the greatest because the entire team didn't perform really well in that aspect. But making note of his time on ice versus elite competition and seeing here that Chicago's defense with him on the ice versus without him on the ice is a little bit better. You could definitely see how a guy like a David Kampf can make a difference defensively. I'm a big believer in quality of teammate being just as important as quality of competition. And with these being his most common line mates and already knowing that he spent a great deal of ice time against other teams' best players, I can understand why, the surface results aren't necessarily the greatest. And if you're thinking to yourself, well, he's going from the Blackhawks to the Leafs and they're not really the greatest defensively as a team. Well, no, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that they're just better than the Blackhawks are defensively as a team. At least last year anyway. They were quite bad. So yes, the David Kampf signing does make a little bit more sense now, but I guess the question is, did you have to pay 1.5 for him? But then the other question becomes, like, what are you arguing about here? Whether they would have paid him 1.25 million versus 1.5, but then I guess that adds up, right? So if you're looking at what this means for the Toronto Maple Leaf lineup right now, and don't pay too much attention to the lines, I just have it more or less sorted by salary cap. I'm going to do a video reviewing everything that the Leafs did in free agency, obviously in a couple of days, if not a week from now, when all the dust sort of settles, because I don't necessarily think that they're done. But if you're looking at what they have done so far, they got their tandem goalie in Peter Mrazek, which I think is a win. They were able to find Michael Bunting, who I think can give them a lot of value for $950,000, having excellent underlying numbers with the Arizona Coyotes, playing in their top 6 and succeeding. And they get their defensive centerman in David Kampf to get Alex Kerfoot out of that role that he was shoehorned into all of last season. So while the names may not be impressive, I think they've checked a lot of boxes, and it's only about 3:30 on the first day of free agency. And I think that they've positioned this roster so that they can now maybe look at signing that other top 6 forward, maybe taking a look at the trade market. And it has been rumored that maybe they're interested in moving on from a guy like Kerfoot, maybe even a guy like Mikheyev here. And I think that the David Kampf signing makes that more likely. Don't pay too much attention to the lines, just hear me out here. Maybe you start the season with a guy like Pierre Engvall on waivers, right? I've said this like 18 times today. But you can send him down to the minors. You can still have some center depth, some depth on the penalty kill. Only costs you $125,000 against the cap to kind of stash him down there. Maybe you look to move on from a guy like Mikheyev. You know, he generates a ton of scoring chances, yeah, but his puck handling, his shot, not necessarily the greatest. And if you don't think that he's going to improve in that area, then the scoring chances that he generates are more or less going to be the same as to what we saw last season. And this leaves the Leafs with one more forward being needed here and $4.2 million in cap space. You know, Michael Bunting was able to succeed in a top 6 role with the Arizona Coyotes for the 21 games that he played. Yes, he had a high shooting percentage, but he played with Connor Garland, Nick Schmaltz, and Clayton Keller. Maybe you're able to bring in someone that's making about $4 million either via trade or free agency, and then that bumps Kerfoot down in the lineup. And now you have a guy who can play center but is now on the wing, which he's better suited for, can give you some defensive value there and move up in your lineup if you need him to, while still having a bit of a sheltered bottom 6 line with Robertson, Adam Brooks, and Jason Spezza potentially, and you can allow Nick Robertson to earn more ice time as he goes, right? Shelter him on that line a bit, give him some power play time, and make him work up the lineup. And then come the trade deadline, you're able to do a lot with very little, especially when you consider that players' salaries will be prorated and by quite a bit by the time the deadline rolls around. And if you're getting 50% salary retained or even double salary retained, you really don't need that much to acquire a player making between $3 and $5 million. And as the season plays out, you'll be able to see what the team kind of needs, right? You have Liljegren here as an extra defenseman who you can send down on days that he's not playing because he's on a 2-way contract, and you can bank some cap space that way. And on days where he is playing, you know, you can get a look at what this player is. Can he take bigger steps? Can you lean on him? Because playing with the Toronto Marlies, he did kill penalties. And in the few games that he did get in with the Leafs last year, he was killing penalties in those games. I think that the way that the roster is positioned right now, I think that you have a bit of depth. I think that you have some options. I like it. I kind of do. Yeah, no, I can say that I like the team. Even though they were really disappointing, I don't need to preface every single conversation that I have about the Toronto Maple Leafs with how disappointed I am for how last season was. Yes, that goes without saying. But that doesn't mean that I can't be optimistic to next season and maybe look for the young players on this roster, you know, guys that are still 23, 24, and 25 years old, to maybe develop. I understand that for the amount of money that they're making, that's not necessarily acceptable. But that's the situation that we're in right now, and if you would like to be optimistic about the team, that's what you're hoping for. Because I really don't think that it's too much of a request to ask your best players to just be your best players. And if they do figure it out, yeah, I can get behind it. But if they don't, like I said a couple of videos ago, whatever happens this season will be deserved. It'll be deserved. Good or bad, it'll be deserved on everyone's account. Before I get out of here, Kyle Dubas, during that eye-rolling press conference that he gave on day 2 of the draft on Saturday, did make note that they were looking for an element to their forward core that they don't already have. But let me know what you guys think down below. The David Kampf signing was a little bit confusing, but after looking into those numbers, I'm going to use that Puck IQ site a lot more now that I know that it exists, because there are a lot of great tools for hockey stats and stuff like that. Most of them are behind paywalls, but at the same time, a lot of the information gets shared on Twitter anyway. But every once in a while, you discover one and you're just like, where has this been? Right? And then you spend hours and hours perusing through it all because you need to know. So make sure to like the video if you did like it, and subscribe for more, because more is always on the way, guys. And remember, I posted a lot today, but we're going to continue that into the next week or so before things really, really die.